Joining me on the show today is Jill Savage. In 2011, Jill discovered her husband Mark was having an affair. He was in a very dark place emotionally and spiritually and left Jill and their 5 children for several months to be in another relationship. In 2012, he had his own personal resurrection and recommitted to his marriage and his family. After years of healing, Jill and her husband have dedicated their lives to using this experience to help others who are in crisis in their marriages. I am so honored to have Jill here today to share her story with us and the lessons she's learned along the way. Jill, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so good to be here, Adrienne.
So, I just kind of gave away a little bit of the story in the intro, but I'd like to go back to the beginning and just kind of tell us a little bit about how you met Mark and, the beginning years of your marriage. Let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, I met Mark right between the summer between my freshman year I graduated from high school and my freshman year in college. And I met him on a blind date. And we were engaged 4 months later and married almost 10 months later. So it was fast.
Wow.
I was,
Yeah.
it was really fast. I was young. So I was 19 when we got married. He was 23.
Mhm.
And my dad gave us a wedding gift and that if I stayed in school, he would continue to pay for my college. But if I left school,
Mm.
then I'd be on my own if I ever wanted to return. So the carrot was hanging in front of my nose. And I was like, well, I'm
Mhm.
staying in school. So 9 months later, or 11 months after we got married, we found out we were pregnant. I continued with school, had our first child. And by the time I got to my senior year, found out I was pregnant again, did my student teaching,
Wow.
pregnant, and actually had our second child on my college graduation day. I did not, needless to say, walk across the stage. They mailed me my diploma.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Well, just the fact that you had 2 children and were married and completed a college degree is a pretty significant accomplishment of its own.
Either
Yeah,
that or
that's pretty
it's
big.
evidence of insanity, either one. But
Yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
One or the other.
Yep. But
So I
yeah.
know Mark. Mhm.
Go ahead.
So I know you and Mark have been married for 40 years, but you've said that before that 30 of them were happily. And so let's take me to the time where things kind of started to go sideways for you guys.
So, I would say that, the first year things were pretty easygoing. And then, as with most marriages, you get a year or two under your belt, and then you start really realizing that the things that drew you to each other are now driving you crazy because opposites attract. And
Mm-hmm.
so we experienced that. But as time went on, Mark struggled with anger. I never felt fearful of his anger, but also never seen that before. Like he would throw something or he would break something. I never felt like I was, in danger or the kids. He never hurt anyone, but that was like I was like, what is going on? Like this was really something that I had never experienced. In my family, I grew up in, um, we were avoiders, and so we were the buck up family. So you didn't have a whole lot of
Yeah.
conflict, and so this was really foreign
Because
to
you just
me.
didn't talk about it, right?
No, you didn't
Yeah.
talk about it. Right. Mark's family screamed and
Yeah.
yelled, and my family just pushed it under the rug. Actually, both of
Pushed
those are
it. Yeah.
equally unhealthy. Let's be honest. Okay. They're equally unhealthy,
Yes.
although one
Yes.
presents itself as being better than the other. And so,
Mhm.
anyway, so we sought some counsel in the first 10 years. Like we went to a marriage counselor, um, trying to understand the dynamics that were playing out. What was the core of his anger? There were other things. He was always disappointed. We began to realize pornography had been a part of it, actually had been a part of the home that he grew up
Mhm.
in. Like his stepfather had pornography
Um,
available,
mhm.
and Mark saw it way before any child, should have ever been exposed to something like that. So we're dealing with all of these
Mhm.
things. We're also I'm realizing I'm critical. So I've got this critical side of me, that's not helping. And so, we start
Mhm.
to work on some different things. But in general, I would say that when we finally hit year 28, um, things had been really challenging, just in Mark's work life. He was a pastor.
Mhm.
He'd been a pastor for 20 years, and he was really worn out. He was just really, really
Mhm.
exhausted. And he decided, he said, I need a break. Like, I really need to step away. I'm not in a good place. And I thought that was really
Mhm.
wise. I completely agreed with that. It was a little scary, when 20 years, that's all we've done. But
Mhm.
um, we stepped away, and I really thought he would experience relief, and I think he did in some ways, but he emotionally just seemed to be spiraling. Now, he had dealt with um
Mm.
he had dealt with depression, anxiety, all of those things from most of our marriage. So he would have dark seasons, especially winter would be hard for him. We had different ways
Mhm.
that he was working to handle that. But it just seemed like, man, this was dark. Like he was spiraling, and
Mhm.
it was not good. And so we started seeing another counselor. He was seeing a counselor individually. And I knew he was disillusioned. I knew he was disillusioned with life. I knew he was disillusioned with God. He was disillusioned with our marriage. I mean, I knew that, but I don't think I had any idea the depth of that, until one
Mhm.
day when I discovered that he was talking to someone else, and
Mm.
had reconnected with an old high school girlfriend on Facebook. And
Wow.
that rocked me. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, like this. Okay, I would have put us in the least likely to ever experience this
Mhm.
category. And I
Mhm.
was floored. Um, and so we talked about it, and he said, yeah, you're right. I really shouldn't be having these conversations. And we had always been like, if I was working with a man in ministry, like I would loop Mark in. If he was working with a woman, he would loop me in.
Mhm.
Okay, well, hey, we need to go back to some of those hedges of protection that we have. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'll put a stop to this. And unfortunately, he
Yeah.
didn't. So
Mm.
he
So
continued on.
So before we go deeper into that part of it, something that you said to me that I want to get some clarification around is you said that he was disillusioned, right?
Mhm.
Disillusioned with with all the things. What does that mean to you? Like describe to me what disillusioned means. Like how did that show up or what was his behavior like or what was happening?
Terribly disappointed. So one of the things that we now talk about and we teach about is the power of unrealistic expectations. And so
Mm.
unrealistic expectations is like having, like, I'm kind of holding, for those that are listening, my hand is kind of above my head, and then I've got another hand down at my
Mhm.
chin. So it's like, here's
Mhm.
unrealistic expectations way up here, and here's reality down here. The space in between is
Mhm.
discontentment. And when you sit in
Mm.
discontentment day in, day out, day in, day out, life doesn't look the way you think it should. Life isn't turning out the way you want it
Mm.
to. In his case, God isn't doing the things I want him to do. And all of this was going,
Mhm.
so it was discontent. which became disappointed,
Mm-hmm.
which then became
Mm-hmm.
disillusioned, which then became disconnected. And all of that was
Okay,
playing out.
yeah, that's very interesting. That's something I really want people to hear that are listening to this, because I think everybody in some way, shape, or form in their life probably has an improper expectation. And that's where our disappointment comes from. And you
It
just
does.
breaking it down in that, how that shows up. And if it happens in your marriage, then it's destroying your marriage. If it happens in your career, it's destroying your career. Like, it can even happen in your parenting, where you have these unrealistic expectations of how your children should behave or what they should do. And then when they don't do that, like you said, in the very bottom of that list, you said disconnect, right?
Yep.
And so if we want to be connected, to our kids, if we want to be connected to our spouses, if we want to be connected in whatever, like, that can't happen if there's unrealistic expectations.
Yep. You are exactly right. And so we have to learn to identify those. A lot of times people are like, well, how do I know if my expectations are unrealistic? Well, I would say the first thing is,
Mm-hmm.
how often are you saying ought and should? Because ought and should
Mm.
are going to be your red flags. And then people will say, well, if I move from my expectations and I move down, then I'm settling. Then I'm settling for
Mm.
something less. And it's like, no, you're accepting reality. And when we can move to a place of reality, what it does in a relationship. So let's just talk about it from a relationship perspective, is we meet that person where
Mm-hmm.
they are. And when we meet that person
Mm-hmm.
where they are, then what happens is we create safety in the relationship. And if we create safety in the
Mm.
relationship, that becomes fertilizer for growth. And so then that is how we actually make change in relationships.
Okay. All right. We're going to sit here for a minute, because you're totally blowing my mind right now. And I know we got to get into all the other stuff, and we will, but I'm saying this because this has happened to me, and I know there's people listening that this has happened to. Is I've been told at different points in time in my life by different people, you need to lower your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that always sounded like a cop out for the other person to not have to really try that hard. Right. And just to be like, you ask for too much or you expect too much. And to me, in my brain, that interpreted as, I'm kind of lazy. I don't care that much and I don't want to try that hard. And what you just said is very different, where that's not what it means at all. And so I want to just like noodle on that for a minute, because you talked about when you accept reality, maybe, and it doesn't mean they're lazy, that creates safety, which for me seems like that would be so counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm. But it creates safety for them, because if not, what happens is, if I'm way up here going, hey, you need to be up here, then what I'm doing is I keep trying to pull them up.
Mm-hmm.
And what'll happen is they might make a baby step. They might make a little baby step. But if I'm up here
Mm-hmm.
looking down from this viewpoint, I'm not going to see that baby step. Not even, I'm going to be like, they're
Mm-mm.
doing nothing. They are doing nothing. But if
Yep.
I can
Yep.
get to a place of acceptance, and when I can get to a place of acceptance where I'm at their level, then actually I'm now in a position to see when they might make a little baby step. Just a tiny little baby step. Oh,
Mm.
now that's a different ball game. Now I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now I can value that. Here, I'm going to be critical because I'm not seeing it. But here,
Yep.
I'm going to be able to understand, oh, wait a minute, they are trying. And then I affirm
Mm-hmm.
that, I encourage that, and we slowly move up. Now, probably this up
Mm.
here doesn't really even exist. Like, a lot of
Right.
times we do have, in fact, one of the things my husband had to come to understand is, we all have unrealistic expectations. his temperament. And then one of the things we really learned a lot about in our healing journey was attachment style. And his attachment style struggles with unrealistic expectations more than other people might. Now, I had some
Mhm.
unrealistic expectations coming into marriage. I thought, you know, in a healthy marriage, people didn't fight or argue or
Right.
disagree. Well, let's just say they didn't even disagree, because I never saw my
Mhm.
parents disagree. So that
Right.
was unrealistic.
Yeah.
And so, but he had so Mark grew up in a really unhealthy, dysfunctional home, and there was
Mhm.
abuse. And so in his mind, he created a picture of like, this is what my family is going to look like. I am out of here. As
Mhm.
soon as I can be out of here, I'm out of here. And this is what my family is going to look like. And the
Mhm.
problem was that picture in his mind wasn't real. Like it couldn't exist, because he had it was an escape fantasy for him. But because
Mm.
he had that in his mind, he was always measuring life against that. He was measuring me against that. He was measuring marriage against that. And then he sat in that place of, that place of discontentment, year in,
Yeah.
year out, 28 years. And
Mm.
honestly, many times this is the essence of a midlife crisis for people.
Mm.
I mean, when we
Yeah.
now look back and we can see it for what it is, and at that time, Mark would have said, I'm not in a midlife crisis. But now he looks back and goes, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
total midlife crisis. And part of the reason
Mhm.
that people have that midlife crisis is they have this picture of what life should look like in their
Yeah.
head. And
Yep.
and then they put in so many years that it doesn't look that way. And at some
Mm.
point they say, forget this. I'm going to go blaze my own path, because I've been waiting for this to happen.
Mhm. And I'm running out of time.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about that personality style? So I have a personality that is very driven, and I'm always like, I want to be the best at everything I do. I want to do everything with excellence. I never want to stop growing. I always want to be being better. And so what's the difference between like being ambitious and driven, but unrealistic expectations? Because to me, that feels like it could get muddy,
It can.
and it could be you putting it on someone else. Like, I'm like, well, I'm showing up this way. Why aren't you showing up this way? And that just might not even be their personality style. And so, how do you like it makes me think of like the difference between you're asking somebody to be somebody that they can't even, they're not even capable of being, let alone what they even, that they're even trying. Right. So,
Yes.
that feels muddy to me too.
It does. And a big part of what Mark and I work with couples when we work with them in coaching and our marriage intensives is we are first helping them to understand themselves, and then helping
Hmm.
them to understand each other. Because
Hmm.
you really do need to understand that sometimes we are asking them to literally be someone they are not. And so when we look at our healing process, one of the biggest things that happened for us is we began to accept one another. And as we accepted one another, we were creating that safety in the relationship. We were creating
Hmm.
that in such a beautiful way. And then, that doesn't mean that we can't invite each other to growth, right? Like,
Right.
my husband is, here's an example. I am an internal processor. My husband is an external processor.
Yes.
And so we actually do like when we work with a couple, we'll have them do, we call it a personal operating inventory, but it's actually like how what is their operating system. And
Hmm.
so his is this external processor. I'm internal. Well, what does that mean? Well, he talks, and like he has to talk through things to make a decision. So we say he talks and talks and talks and talks and talks and talks and talks some more, and wears me out. Like he narrates my
Right.
life. Like we're even driving down the road, and he will like read the signs aloud, signs that I would read and say nothing, and he will read them aloud.
Right.
But okay, I'm internal. Well, what I often say when I'm explaining is that means I think about it, 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 and then I tell my husband what we decided.
Mm.
And he goes, Wait a minute,
Like,
when do we talk about it?" And I'm like,
first time I'm hearing about this. Yeah.
"Ah!" Yep.
Yeah.
And so okay, he needs to respect that I am an internal processor. He needs to understand that, because before
Mhm.
he didn't understand that, he thought that if I wasn't talking about something, I wasn't thinking about something, which wasn't true.
Mm. Mhm.
I have to respect that he is an external processor, and I have to value that he needs processing time. He needs to verbally discuss things. And
Mhm.
so I have to value that. So we have to value that in
Yeah.
each other. However, I'm invited to growth, because you can't be an internal processor and not be, if you're an internal processor and you're not collaborative in your marriage is going to
Mhm.
suffer. So I
Yeah.
have to learn how to get things out of my head and out my mouth,
Mhm.
because they just stay in my head naturally.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot going on up there. But if I'm going to choose to be married, I have to learn how to bring ideas to the table sooner rather than later. I have to learn how to talk through pros and cons, things that I would probably prefer to do in my head, and I will do
Yeah.
it in my head a little bit. But hey, there's two people in this relationship, so I've got to bring that. For him, he also has to realize that he has to give me space for decision making, because I need time to think about it. So
Right.
so we're both accepting who we are. I can't change him and make him a different kind of processor, and he can't do that for me. But we're still
Mhm.
invited to growth within that. And
Yeah.
that's really key. So that's where we have to really honor how the other person's wired. But it's not
Right.
saying, oh, well, this is just who they are, nothing can change. No, it's both and.
Yeah. Both and. Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay, this is good. This is gonna be such a good interview. I'm so excited. So Mark's talking to his old high school girl on Facebook, or someone from high school, and he says, I think you said he agreed he would stop talking to her. Is that
Yeah.
correct? But he
Yes.
didn't.
He didn't. He
Okay.
drove it underground. And
Okay.
and so unfortunately it was 3 months later that I discovered it had become a full-blown affair.
Mm.
And both times I discovered it on his phone. So
Mm.
the first time when they were just talking, we were in a restaurant. He went to the restroom. The phone was laying on the table. He didn't take it with him, and she texted him. And I went, "Whoa, wait a minute. Who is this?"
Right.
But the second time I came home from a speaking engagement, and got home pretty late, and he had the phone in his hand, and was asleep. And
Mm.
I didn't really give it any thought, because at that point I still was trusting that he did what he said he would do, and I hadn't had any evidence other than the fact that he was still not personally doing well. And by this
Right.
time, so he's been out of ministry for a year at this point in time. And one of the things, when we were in ministry, we stayed away from alcohol. When
Mhm.
he left ministry, he began to enjoy that. But by this point,
Mhm.
he was misusing it. And, we can now look
Okay.
back on it and go, I mean, he was just a mess. He was just
Yeah.
struggling in so many ways, using it as a coping mechanism. So, so he had drank too much that night, and I had picked up the phone out of his hand and seen the conversation on the screen, and it became immediately evident that they had been together. And
Mm.
I wanted to throw up. I
Yeah.
just wanted to throw up. I mean, it's the most horrendous experience. Um, I've been through a lot in my life, including breast cancer, losing my hair,
Mm.
all kinds of things. But I'm going to tell you, that moment was the hardest moment of my life.
Yeah. Did you just like throw the phone at him and wake him up? Like,
I did not, believe it
what
or
I mean,
not, Adrienne.
what did
I
you
did
do?
not. So let me tell you what happened. Um, I carried the phone downstairs because I wanted to look at more of it. Like I wanted to
Right.
know, right? So I
Yeah.
just carried it downstairs and I start going through it. And I'm just like sick to my stomach.
Mhm.
And so I start praying because faith is an important part of my life. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
Lord, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And immediately I knew I needed to call her. So
Mm.
I used his phone and called her.
Oh, wow.
So she obviously thought
Did she know
it
he
was
was
him.
married?
Yeah.
Right, she thought it was him. Did she
Yeah.
knew, she knew.
She knew he was
Was it
married.
someone that you knew?
No. Mm-mm.
You didn't
No.
know her, okay.
Mm-mm. So I
How'd that
did.
conversation go?
Um, 1 a.m. in the morning,
Mhm.
I look back. I think I was in shock and I was
Yeah.
amazingly under control. I don't even
Mhm.
understand this.
Yeah.
Other than I think at this point, I mean, I was, I could feel the emotional sick to my stomach,
Mhm.
but, I did, I just said, I had identified who I was. I said, I know what's going on. I've seen everything on the phone. And I just laid my boundary and I said, I never want you to speak to my husband again. And,
Mhm.
and I told her, I said, you are meant for more than this. And
Mm.
I just want you to know that God is calling you to be a woman of integrity. And that's not what this is. And
Wow.
that was it. Like I had all the words and there was
Right.
nothing on the other end. And I
Yeah.
just pretty much hung up. And, uh, so then, this was really interesting, Adrienne. I have a girlfriend and, she's a real sensitive, you might call her an empath. People sometimes,
Mhm.
she's real sensitive to just what's going on emotionally with other people. And every time over like
Mhm.
the past 6 months, she would be at my house and we'd be interacting. She'd say, Jill, Mark is not in a good place. And I'm like, I know. And she's like,
Mm.
so, so about 2 months before this night happened, she kept saying to me, hey, I'm just going to leave my phone on. And if you ever need me, even in the middle of the night, you call. And I was like,
Oh.
Becky, I'm not calling you in the
Mm.
middle of the night. She's like,
Right, right. Mhm.
she's like, I know, but I'm just telling you. And, she's an empty nester. She didn't have kids at home. She had that ability to, and she said, I don't know.
Be available.
I'm just
Mhm.
telling you, I'm just going to leave it on. And if you need me. So my
Wow.
next move, it's now 1:30 in the morning. Right. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
I have to call Becky. And so I did, I called her and that's when I let it all go. I mean,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, I'm
Mm.
sobbing. I'm beside myself. I'm a mess. And Becky and I talked for probably close to 2 hours that night. And we prayed
Wow.
and we talked and we prayed and we cried and we prayed. And we, she just got me through that night. I slept on the couch the rest of the night.
Mark's
And
asleep the whole time
oh, he's
while this
asleep.
is
He has
happening.
no clue. Yeah.
No clue.
Nope. And not only that, we had a counseling appointment the next afternoon. And Becky and I
Oh, wow.
decided it was probably best for me to wait and confront him in the counselor's office. Because if
Mm.
I said something to him before that, he probably wouldn't go. And
Yeah,
so
for sure. That was
we
smart.
yep. So we did. I waited for the counseling appointment. Then honestly, he was in such a bad place, and he said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm having an affair, and I'm not stopping." And so the counselor
And
set.
I'm not stopping?
No, I'm not stopping. Yeah, yeah, I'm not stopping.
Oh, wow.
So there's a.
That has to be a response you probably didn't anticipate.
This is not my husband. Like this is not the
Yeah.
man I married. I don't even know who's in front of me.
Mm.
And so no, I didn't anticipate that at all. I thought he would, the man I know could get, I mean, he was lost, but oh my gosh, he's going to get back on track. Now that didn't happen for a long
Right.
time. And, so, initially, so the counselor separated us, said, what would you like? I said to him, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, if he can agree to get some help, um, I have some suggestions for some next steps. I think that you could have him stay. But if he refuses to get help, then I think that you need to ask him to leave.
Mhm.
And so ended up when Mark talked with the counselor, he actually did agree to get help. So at that point, he
So
stayed.
he agreed to get help, but he would not agree to stop seeing her.
He agreed to slow things down and that he would cut things off, but you could tell he was not all in on that agreement, but
Yeah. Mhm.
and then he agreed to go to it was a seminar that was going to happen. It was called Every Man's Battle. And so Mark agreed to go to that. And so, back to make a long story short, he went back and forth between breaking it off and going back to the relationship 7 times in over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Over how long?
over 7 months. And then finally, and then in 3 months into that, he moved out and he said, I'm going to file for divorce, and you're gonna get divorce papers. I'm moving on. And our kids, so let me pause for a moment. Our kids, 3 of them were in their 20s out on their own, and 2
Okay.
teenagers still at
Mhm.
home. All 5 of them,
Mhm.
an absolute wreck. I mean, they are a wreck. And
Of course.
so,
Yeah.
I'm dealing with my pain now when they moved. Now, they didn't know anything until their dad moved out. I was really working hard that we could get
Mhm.
through this crisis and not have to drag them through it and then be able to tell them, hey,
Right.
we went through this, but we're okay. Well, when he moved out,
Right.
they had to know everything. And so now I'm dealing with my pain on top of their pain. And so it was after he moved out, it was 2.5 months later where he actually, and this is why we say he had his own personal resurrection. It was on Easter Sunday morning. And
Wow.
he was, so by this time, Adrienne, the interesting thing is the other relationship had been going on long enough that he was beginning to experience conflict there. And that
Mm.
was a wake up call.
Yeah.
Dr. Gary Chapman, who is the author of the book, The 5 Love Languages, one of the things he
Mhm.
says is, every new relationship gets the tingles, and the tingles goes
Yeah.
away
Yeah.
usually anywhere from 1 to 2 years. The tingles sometimes even 6 months to 2 years. Well,
Mhm.
Mark
Mm.
he was coming close to almost a year in this relationship, and it's starting. So that actually served as a bit of a wake up call for him. In
Right.
in the meantime, I was making some pretty big changes because I really I kept going to counseling even after Mark was like, I'm out of here. I kept going to
Mhm.
counseling. And one of the things I identified is that my attachment style was the avoidant attachment style. And
Mhm.
so I was in my avoidance I was sending an unintentional message to my husband that I did not need him. And I'd done that for a
Mm.
long time. Um,
Mhm.
I didn't know really how to connect emotionally. I operated very like with this really strong inner strength, which made me a really good leader, a great
Yeah.
entrepreneur, all of those things that you
Yeah.
need in the business world, but I was
Yeah.
missing the soft side. I was missing
Mhm.
the compassion. I was and so I just I mean, he wasn't even telling me exactly those things, but I was starting to understand that in my counseling. And I was like, I got to get after this. Like whether
Mm.
my marriage makes it or my marriage doesn't make it, I got to get after this. And
Right.
so I started doing a lot of internal work. I started doing my own emotional work. And in
Mhm.
fact, when I launched my podcast, so my podcast is the No More Perfect podcast, my very
Mm.
first episode is titled How I Stopped Being a Buck Up Wife and Mother, because that was
Mm.
so much a part of my journey of healing.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so I'm going through this. He sees it, the very little that
Yeah.
we're interacting, he sees it, but he doesn't trust it and he doesn't believe it because
Right.
he feels like I'm actually manipulating him and I'm just doing this to, for him to come back. And honestly, at this point in time,
Right.
I'm thinking, I don't even know if I want that marriage. I mean, to be really
Right.
honest with you, although I was standing for it because I was not believing that we were done. And I was not believing
Right.
that this is what that God had for us. So, so anyway, all of that to say, he was seeing that it was starting to birth seeds of hope in him,
Mm.
is what it was doing. Like,
Mm.
gosh, if we really could get back together, could it be different? Like, she seems like she's
Mhm.
different, but I don't even know if I
Mhm.
trust it. And don't get me wrong, Adrienne, I didn't cause my husband's affair, but I contributed to the dysfunction in our marriage.
Right.
I know that. That's what I was going after.
Right.
And
Right.
so eventually on Easter Sunday, literally it was almost like the blinders just came off and he saw it, and he also was at the end of himself. He was just I mean, he had it's like the story in the Bible of the prodigal son who, gets to the end of himself and then
Mhm.
comes home. And
Yeah.
certainly that happened with Mark. And I saw the change in him as we had this little interaction, and I just saw like the surrender kind of come over him, like, okay,
Mm.
I'm done doing it my way. Like this, I have made
Yeah.
a mess. And it was a very much a spiritual experience for him. Lord, I'm so sorry. And I will do whatever you asked me to do. And
Yeah.
so I saw it, but I didn't trust it. Obviously, that he's,
Yeah.
I he'd gone back and forth, but I'd never seen quite what had happened there and the surrender
Mhm.
that was happening. But sure enough, I mean, it was for real. And we stayed separated, but began to work on rebuilding the marriage after that Easter Sunday. And he eventually returned home 2 months later. And we continued in counseling for 18 months. And,
Mhm.
it took us about that long to fully
Yeah.
heal from that. And honestly, we had trust to rebuild with each other. I mean, he wasn't
Right.
the only one that had to rebuild trust. I had broken his trust with my criticism. We also had a dynamic
Mhm.
that we call the strong woman, silent man dynamic playing out. And
Mm. Talk
so
about that.
my strength was overpowering at time. I often misused my strength in our marriage.
Mhm.
And then he would be silent or just say, okay, whatever. But he was really silent and simmering. And so that would simmer,
Mm.
and then that was building bitterness in his
Right.
heart against me. And so we've changed that. Like I don't misuse my strength in our relationship anymore. And he speaks up and uses his voice a lot more, and is not so quick to say, oh, I don't care. We'll do whatever you want to do. Um,
So give me an example of what that means when you say I stopped showing up so strong in my strength. Like give me an example of like what that would look like.
okay, I'm a researcher. And I operate by data, facts, logic. Like I'm
Mhm.
naturally a thinker.
Mhm.
Mark is more of a feeler. He is more intuition, gut, instinct.
Mhm.
So I always operated that my way was the better way because it was based upon facts. And
Yes.
so therefore I was misusing that strength of mine in a way that caused a power dynamic in our relationship. It was not
Mhm.
healthy. It was not
Right.
healthy. And then, when he looked at him not using his voice, like that went all the way back to his childhood. Because when you grow up in an abusive home,
Yeah.
with a stepfather that is, overpowering, you learn to just be quiet.
Mhm.
And so he had that
Yeah.
message,
Mhm.
my voice doesn't matter. It was hardwired into him from from the early years. And then he goes into marriage
Yeah.
believing my voice doesn't matter. And he doesn't use his voice very often. But then what that does is it causes me to go, come on, like, and then, because I'm frustrated,
Yeah.
I want his input. But then after a while you go, you know what, you're slowing me down. And all of that was it
Mhm.
was unhealthy. And so
Yeah.
one of the things we talk about in our No More Perfect Marriages book is something that we call the slow fades. And slow fades are when these little unhealthy dynamics have been playing underneath the surface and we don't even realize it. They're like erosion on a beach. They're eroding connection. They're eroding
Mhm.
trust. And so we had
Mhm.
so many of those. And one of the slow fades that we talk about is the slow fade of minimizing. I was minimizing his thoughts and feelings. On the rare occasion he
Mhm.
would speak up, I would kind of say, no, hey, you're
Because it's just based on feelings or
exactly.
like you said, intuition or whatever, and so you're like, "My logic trumps that."
Yep. Yep. And so that was so unhealthy. And so that is a dynamic that has changed for both of us from a lot of different angles.
Yeah. I know you said this a while ago, but I wrote it down because I know that there's people listening that we kind of glossed over it, but you mentioned that he left and came back 7 times over a 7-month period.
No, he didn't leave and come
And
back. He recommitted or like
oh, okay,
verbally, like, okay, I will stop.
verbally,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
But then didn't.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or did,
And so
and
it's
it
like,
didn't stick. Like,
right.
I think he had some good intentions, but it would only last for 2 or 3
Mhm.
weeks.
And so how do you and I don't even know if I know how to ask this question, but it's like, how do you know when enough is enough, right? How do
Mm,
you know when it's like, I'm done with this. I shouldn't keep giving this person,
yeah.
not person, my husband, this many chances. This is hurting me. This is hurting my children, and there are people listening that might think, I mean, I couldn't even have given him 2 chances,
Sure.
like what is happening inside of you? What are the things that you're thinking that is allowing you to keep giving him chances, for a lack of better
Yeah.
words?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things that were going on inside of me. One, I remember as a little girl, um, my mom always got this magazine and it was called Guideposts magazine. And it was these stories of like miracles and stories of faith. And I remember reading them. She always kept them in the bathroom. And so every bathroom stop, you'd read 2 or 3 stories. And it would just like, it formed this belief in me that A, God's at work, and B, that there's nothing too big that God can't do. So for me, my
Mhm.
faith was definitely kicking in. Um,
Right.
and I think that has given me some pretty strong perseverance, as
Mhm.
well. Just giving God time to work. I had no doubt God was at work. I wasn't sure Mark was going to let him work. Like
Mm.
I knew God was doing I knew
Mhm.
God was chasing after him, but I knew
Right.
I wasn't sure that Mark was going to let him in. And so, part of it was I wanted to give time for that. The second part is when I was really taking my marching orders, and from God, like I was like, "What do you want me to do?" And the only thing I heard deep in my soul was, "I
Mhm.
want you to love him." I heard that. Now
Mm.
I didn't hear a
Wow.
voice.
That's hard.
I didn't hear a voice, but I heard, "I want you to
Yeah.
love him." And was
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, "Well, I know that's not from me because I don't feel it right now."
Yeah.
Like,
It's not from me.
not at all. And so I was like, I remember saying to God, you got to be kidding me, because I don't know if you've noticed,
Mhm.
he's not real lovable right now. And
Yeah.
God whispered back to my heart, I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes you're not lovable either. And I was like,
Mm.
you know what? God loves me when I'm unlovable. I don't know how to do that. Like, I know how to love somebody
Yeah.
who's loving me back. I don't
Yeah.
like, wow. So what I realized is my love needed to grow up.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so that is something that was part of my journey that I'm on. Right. And so
Yeah.
I will tell you that, Adrienne, I was getting to the place where I was ready to completely open my hands up and be like, I'm going to accept reality. It's by this point in
Right.
time, we're coming up on a year. Nothing is changing. Um, and and so I am ready to say, and even my Christian counselor was ready, he was starting to say, "Okay, Jill,
Yeah.
I honor your stand for your marriage, but I do think you maybe
Mhm.
need to start thinking of what life might look like,
Mhm.
without Mark making a U-turn." And so I was getting there. And by no means do I believe that, I mean, I will just tell you, everybody has to seek their own wisdom
Mhm.
and their own direction. And it wasn't a matter of like, oh, divorce is, so terrible that I can't do this.
Mhm.
I just didn't feel released from the
Yeah.
marriage. Um,
Mm.
and so I chose to believe for it. So I was just getting close of actually thinking, you know what? I may need to really think of a future that doesn't look the way that I thought it would look. And I was starting to move into a place of acceptance and even feeling the freedom to move forward if I, kind of felt that release. And that's when he
Right.
had his turnaround. And so
Right.
I didn't have to start to look at that. So
Yeah.
I was grateful.
How did you when things started to turn around, h is there something that happened, or was it just over time that because this could have just been the 8th time or the 9th time now that he was saying he was recommitting to the relationship and then he wasn't going to,
Yeah.
and so
Yep.
what happened where you realized this is for real?
Yeah. I think because in his case, it was, I saw like almost this spiritual awakening that happened in him. That Easter
Mhm.
Sunday morning, um, he and I were actually in the same place. We had a new grandbaby born in the Chicago area. We live 2 hours south of Chicago. I had gone up for the birth, been up there. I'd taken the train up, so I didn't have a car back. So he brought our teenage boys, came up, and I actually rode back. All four of us rode back together. We got back really late the night before Easter, and or like the morning of Easter. And Mark still had another 30-minute drive home. And I said to him, why don't you just would you like to just stay here? Because I was afraid he falls asleep at the wheel and it's 2 a.m. at this point. And
Mhm.
he was like, yeah, it probably would be smart. So the next morning, our boys got up and got themselves to church. It's Easter. They're on the vocal team
Mhm.
and different things. And so it's just he and I home. And Mark came in and just literally said, I am filing this week. I want you to know. And I don't want anything to do with you. Literally, all of this is happening on Easter Sunday morning. And I said, so one of the things I was doing is I was slowing down my words. I was slowing down because
Mm.
I've always got words. Mark says I should have been a lawyer.
Mm.
I've always got words.
I've been told that too.
And I was really slowing them down. And so I literally just prayed in that moment, and I was like, I don't even know what to say. And the only thing I thought of is it was Easter. And I was like, well, when you look at the life of Jesus in the Easter story, he didn't want to go to the cross. Like, he was like,
Mm.
take this
Mhm.
from me. Isn't there another way?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just shared that with Mark. I said, Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. I mean, he said, will you take this cup from me? But then he said, but not my will, but yours be done. And Mark says that in that moment, so he had kept a list of everything that was wrong with me. And
Wow.
he literally had a physical list. And
Wow.
and everything that was wrong with with our marriage and all of that. But
Mhm.
he said he really had this sense that God kind of spoke to his heart and was like, Mark, if you'll trust me for the list, I'll take care of the rest. And that and that matched with the other relationship was having conflict, and he was
Mhm.
starting to go, I don't know that this is solving my problem. Like,
Yeah.
I thought this was, but it's coming up short. So you've got
Mhm.
that so that's all of that comes together, and he's at the end of himself. He's just at the end of himself.
Yep.
And so he literally said, you're right. He said, you're right. And then he said, is this Easter? He didn't even know it was Easter. Talk about
Mm.
gone. I mean, he didn't even know. I said, yeah, it's Easter. And he was like, oh my gosh. And then he said, I'm going to pray that. And he did. Like, he just stood there in the middle of the living room and was like, Lord,
Wow.
it's been my way or the highway for the last year. And I've made a mess. And I don't want to do this anymore. It's not my will, but yours. And so when I say I saw a difference, I saw a difference.
Mhm.
Now, I've talked to
Yeah.
plenty of people who spouses have made U-turns and they haven't had this big spiritual experience like what we have had. But they
Mhm.
will say when they get to the end of themselves and they fully surrender, you feel it, you see that. And so
Yeah.
you don't
Mhm.
trust it, because trust is rebuilt by consistent change behavior over time. That's how trust is rebuilt. And so
Mhm.
so I didn't trust it, but I certainly saw that something was different. So I felt enough that something was different. I could put my toe in the water. And
Right.
and when I said, could we start back up with the counselor? And he said, absolutely. Well, he hadn't been willing to
Mm.
do that in the other times.
Right.
So
Right.
just things like, and then he said, he said, I would like, will you be a part of me sending a final letter to this person? And I said,
Wow.
absolutely. That was different. Um,
Yeah.
and so all of these things that were just different, I was like, okay, I think we actually just finally broke the final chain, and
Yeah.
we can start to heal on this. And so
Mm.
that began that process.
Wow. You you mentioned something that I think is very common in relationships, and you called it the strong woman, silent man. But I think it can also be the strong man, silent woman,
Mm-hmm.
in some circumstances where basically one is overpowering the other, and the other one's just choosing to keep their mouth shut in an effort to whatever, to not argue, to do whatever.
Yeah.
And I was at an event recently with Tim Tebow, and somebody asked him, like, you know, about his relationship with his wife or something, and he said that a pastor once told him, whenever you're in an argument with your wife and you guys are, arguing over who's right and who's wrong and this and that, and he goes, what happens when you win, Tim? Like, what happens when you win? And he was like, I don't know, I win. He goes, your wife loses.
Mm.
And everybody in the room was like, ouch. And he was like, how long do you think she's going to be happy and she's going to stay if she loses, right? And like
Time
Tim wasn't, they
in,
don't have
day
marriage
out.
problems. I'm not saying that,
Right.
right? But that's what he was trying to tell him. Like it was like in premarital counseling.
Yep.
What he was saying. They
Yep.
weren't. I want to make that clear. I'm not like saying
Right.
that Tim was having a problem with his wife, but he was just telling him like each time that you win, she loses. And it goes both ways. And again, as the husband, do you want your wife to lose all the time? What's going to do to her over time? It will erode, like you said. And so I think in a lot of relationships, there's probably, and not in all of them, but in a lot of marriages, there's probably the one that's a little bit more stronger and domineering that always has to win or be right. And the other one that is just either so sick of fighting or it's just not worth it that they've become silent.
Yep.
And that to me, and you mentioned that that's like the beginning of disconnection.
It is.
And it will just create a bigger and bigger chasm silently
Yes.
until it's just done.
Yep. You're exactly right. And so we have to start to change that dynamic. And if you're the silent one that is silent and simmering, then you have to learn how to find your voice. And if you're the one that is overpowering, you are the one that you need to start dealing with pride in your life. Because that's the heart of it. My way is the right way. Or, I mean, that's really the core message. One is believing my way is the right way and the other one's believing my voice doesn't matter. And that those two are playing together. And it is such an unhealthy dynamic. And it's one that we see all the time in the coaching that we do, the marriage intensives that we host, just helping couples to begin to break that. And you can do that. I mean, we have successfully made that change. It requires personal growth and couple growth. I think we underestimate how much marriage requires personal growth and couple growth. We think we just need to go like to couples counseling or something like that. Well, yeah, that's going to help you. But what you're going to get in couples counseling is you're both going to get a picture of where you each need to grow. And it's probably differently. It's different.
Yeah.
And you're going to get also help understanding some of the skills that are not developed in your relationship. And so, yes, you need to work on those together.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly you and Mark today have been married for 40 years.
Yeah.
You've talked many times today about the marriage counseling and stuff that you do. So tell us what life looks like today for you and Mark and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so that turnaround, we call it his U-turn, happened in 2012. And so through 2013, we just really focused on our own healing. And honestly, we thought, okay, this is just for us. But about 2015, we really felt like we were supposed to share our story. And so we decided to do that on my blog initially. We wrote a 10-day blog series that we titled the No More Perfect Marriages blog series. And it really, it shared openly what had happened and our journey and lessons learned. And eventually that laid the foundation for our No More Perfect Marriages book, which came out in 2017. And that's when we started doing our marriage coaching and the marriage intensives. So what we say is that we have a 2.0 marriage, and we love the 2.0 us. Mark and Jill 1.0 had a lot of dysfunction in it. Mark and Jill 2.0 is a lot healthier. And so we call our intensive a marriage 2.0 intensive, because that's what we want to do is help couples. We only work with one couple at a time. They come to our home. for 3, 4, or 5 days, depending on which intensive they
Mhm.
want. And we just work with them intently over those 3, 4, or 5
Yeah.
days. And we love that. We love seeing
Mm.
the light bulb come on, seeing people understand themselves, understand each other, heal. We do a process we call clean up on aisle 10. It's where we're cleaning up the mess that has just
Yeah.
accumulated over, and then we have to learn how to clean up those messes in real time. And so that when we have ruptures in our relationship, we know how to repair them and keep short accounts instead of
Yeah.
you know, stewing over it for years and years and years. And so, yeah, we're so grateful that we can use our pain for purpose. And we
Mhm.
just absolutely love what we're doing and helping couples find a 2.0 marriage.
So for people who are listening that they were like, she's reading my book right now. Like she's explaining my marriage or my relationship. Where can people find out more information about your intensives or your book or how they can get help from you?
Yeah, the best place is just to go to our website, which is markandjill.org. And it's MARKANDJILL, markandjill.org. And you'll see all of the information. If you click on marriage, there's all kinds of resources. If you click on coaching, there's all kinds of resources under there. And then we do have, since we've been talking about rebuilding trust, we have a free rebuilding trust guide. And it's, you can find it at rebuildingtrust.us. So
Okay.
rebuildingtrust.us. And that is a resource that we make available because so many, and it doesn't have to be that you have broken trust from infidelity. It can be any type of broken
Mhm.
trust. It could be from
Mhm.
misusing money. It can be from the words that you say to each other. So
Yeah.
we just need to know that there is a roadmap to rebuilding trust and helping people to have the hope that it can happen.
Yeah. Well, I know that we there was a lot of really great things you said today that I had some aha moments, and I'm sure people who are listening did as well. Any last words for people who are listening that are finding themselves in where their marriage is struggling? It doesn't have to do with infidelity. It could be in any way. There's power struggles, there's whatever. Is there any last parting words that maybe we didn't talk about that you just want to share before we wrap up?
I would say it can start with you. Um, because a lot of times people will be like, "Well, my spouse will not, won't go to counseling, or they won't." Which, by the way, a lot of times couples who a spouse won't go to counseling, they'll go to coaching, which is what we offer.
Mm.
That feels a
Mhm.
little safer than
Yeah.
sitting in a counselor's office. So we find that sometimes they're more open to it. They're also more open to it because we coach together. So it's you've got a husband and wife meeting with a husband and wife, and that makes a difference as
Yeah.
well. But what I would say is, even if they're unwilling, it can start with you. And you can bring different responses to the relationship. You can do your own personal work like I was doing during that
Mm.
year of
Mhm.
like getting healthy and understanding my attachment style and understanding the ways that, I was sending unintentional messages to my husband.
Mhm.
And, it made me, whether my marriage made it or didn't make it, it was going to make me a better wife or a better mom, a better grandma. And,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and so it can start with you. And so that would be my encouragement is start with
Yeah.
yourself and get some help yourself, set up a coaching call, um, seek a counselor out, start your own
Yeah.
journey of healing. And you never know what that might open up in the relationship. And if your spouse is willing to get the help, by all means, just get it. Don't stop suffering in
Yeah.
silence. Get some help.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Jill, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation today. I thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on here and just share your story of the pain and the suffering of it all, but it definitely had purpose. And I know that people listening will gain a tremendous amount from it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.